Hello, and welcome to the Rankin Report for Sunday, June the 29th, 2025. Only a few days before Independence Day and a couple of days before the end of June. Thank you for joining me today. From the book of Galatians, chapter 5, verse 1, and this is the King James Version. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. If you've ever had opportunity to check your change, look at the change in your pocket beyond trying to figure out how much you've got and saying, what on earth am I going to be able to buy with this? You notice a few things about our coinage. For example, George Washington's profile on quarters now faces to the right rather than the left. And please don't bother reading anything political into it. The left facing view, I should say, was that way since he first appeared on quarters back in 1932. The national motto, "In God We Trust," is still on all the coins and indeed on all our money, regardless of periodic attempts to remove it. But there is one other word often overlooked, yet stamped on every coin, that I would like to draw your attention to, and that word is liberty. I briefly discussed this in last week's post as liberty versus freedom being the key to the argument over the difference between a constitutional republic, which is what the United States actually is, versus a democracy, which is what many today think we are. The reason for this is the idea that has arisen during recent protests, emblazoned on a banner saying, "No gods or kings, just men." And it is the protesters, many of whom have been taught by professors with Marxist leanings, the woke, and the political opposite of the Trump administration and their supporters, who want to be the men or women, or somewhere in between these days, who desire to rule and are not satisfied with the process the Constitution sets up for our leaders. In addition to confusing a republic with a democracy, you often hear people using the term freedom interchangeably with liberty. Now, in common usage, this is no big deal, for in most modern dictionaries, definitions for the two words are remarkably similar. But liberty is what is on all the coins for a reason, one that was far less subtle to the founders than to us today. To begin with, if you go to the Greek in which the letter from the Apostle Paul to the church at Galatia was written, the word for liberty is eleutheria. And one of the usages for the word in Scripture is the ability to either do or omit things having no relation to salvation. And in a related usage, true liberty is being able to live our lives as we ought, not as we please. Now, by contrast, the word free, which is used in the same sentence, is eleuthero, which means simply to make free, or a kind of simple freedom. You're free to do anything you want. In plain English, freedom means the ability to do as you please without regard for consequences. Liberty, on the other hand, means the ability to do as you please within the limits of how it affects others. It's the same as being able to live according to what God says. Splitting hairs? The founders didn't think so. In the founding era, the single most quoted source of research for law in the United States was the Scriptures, which were well studied by many of the founders. John Quincy Adams, for example, studied different translations of the Bible into different languages, of which he spoke several. Others, however, picked up on the difference as well before the founding era. One of them was Sir William Blackstone, whose commentaries on English common law were the second most quoted reference for forming laws in the new nation. And here is what Blackstone said. For no man that considers a moment would wish to retain the absolute and uncontrolled power of doing whatever he pleases. The consequence of which is that every other man would also have the same power, and then there would be no security to individuals in any of the enjoyments of life. Political, therefore, or civil liberty, which is that of a member of society, is no other than natural liberty so far restrained by human laws, and no farther, as is necessary and expedient for the general advantage of the public. Hence, we may collect that the law, which restrains a man from doing mischief to his fellow citizens, though it diminishes the natural, increases the civil liberty of mankind, but that every wanton and causeless restraint of the will of the subject, whether practiced by a monarch, a nobility, or a popular assembly, is a degree of tyranny. Nay, that even laws themselves, whether made with or without our consent, if they regulate and constrain our conduct in matters of more indifference without any good end in view, are regulations destructive of liberty, whereas, if any public advantage can arise from observing such precepts, the control of our private inclinations in one or two particular points will conduce to preserve our general freedom in others of more importance, by supporting that state of society which alone can secure our independence. In other words, Blackstone was saying natural liberty, or freedom, being able to do as you please. Civil liberty is something more that carries responsibilities. The difference was likewise not lost on Noah Webster. Regarded as one of the founding fathers, Webster is often overlooked when compared to people like Washington, Jefferson, Adams, et al. Yet, also Webster spent years writing textbooks, the first American textbooks for school children, which were in use for about 100 years after the founding of the nation. And he spent years researching the origins of English as spoken and written in the colonies in order to compile the first American dictionary of the language. Webster is responsible for the differences in spelling of words used the same in both countries, but often switching the order of letters. The American center, center, for example, as opposed to the British center, centre, and color, color, for the British colour, for color, for example. In his 1828 edition of the dictionary, Webster wrote, "Natural liberty consists in the power of acting as one thinks fit without any restraint or control, except from the laws of nature. It is a state of exemption from the control of others and from positive laws and the institutions of social life. This liberty is abridged by the establishment of government," or freedom. This freedom is abridged by the establishment of government. Civil liberty is the liberty of men in a state of society, or natural liberty, so far only abridged and restrained as is necessary and expedient for the safety and interest of the society, state, or nation. A restraint of natural liberty not necessary or expedient for the public is tyranny or oppression. Civil liberty is an exemption from the arbitrary will of others, whose exemption is secured by established laws, which restrain every man from injuring or controlling another. Hence, the restraints of law are essential to civil liberty. So Webster further defined two versions of liberty: natural liberty, which could be interpreted as simple, unrestrained freedom, and civil liberty, which is closer to the definition we are more familiar with: liberty with just enough restrictions for the good of the general public. Now, all this may seem a bit dry and academic to you watching, but to the founders, it was important for them to the point of risking their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Patrick Henry, the Burgess from Virginia, called liberty a holy cause and concluded his 1775 address before the Virginia Convention, debating independence from Great Britain with the now famous statement, I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Our national culture appears to be striving to reach the unrestrained state of natural liberty or freedom for citizens, which, as we have seen, can only lead ultimately to anarchy. The differences between liberty and freedom must be made clear to Americans once again and stressed as part of basic citizenship. With rights come responsibilities, and the founders believed our rights come from God. We are responsible to God, our national covenant partner, and to each other, our fellow covenant members. And when we willingly embrace that responsibility and liberty as strongly as Patrick Henry did, this country will be rescued. Pray for the Great Awakening. No king but Jesus. Independence forever. Enjoy July the 4th. Enjoy Independence Day, as I prefer to call it. Enjoy the time off, the cookouts, the fireworks shows, the concerts if you're going to one. Enjoy it all. But always keep in mind and hold in your heart the reason why we put such a big deal about July 4th. And recall what it took for the founders to preserve that for us. Thank you for watching. God bless you, and have a great day.